Bauman. I'm the Senior Director of Professional Learning with COSA. Today we're on an educational expedition. We're here with Kimberlee Pelster, Principal of Thurston High School, who's going to share with us today her experiences with elevating student affinity spaces. Welcome, Kimberlee. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're super excited to talk to you. We've heard that your work is so amazing, and so really want to learn more about it and share it with other folks across the state. So Kimberlee, what was the impetus for starting this work around affinity spaces for students?
Yeah, so at Thurston High School, we have an increasingly diverse community of students. Right now, we have about 25% of our student body identifies as Latinx. And then we have various other kind of smaller identity groups. And one of the things that's really important to me is that all of our students have a place where they feel deeply seen and connected. And it's important to our school as well. And one of the things we kept hearing is that some of our students felt super connected in their activities and their athletics and their theater performances. And there were also these other pieces of their identity that weren't a part of feeling represented and seen in that space. And in a small school like ours, well, we have just over 1,200 students, but when you get to those percentages, the number of African American students that we have is about a dozen.
Okay.
And so it isn't going to happen necessarily on accident that our Black students are going to have a community that forms kind of organically. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen because we identify a staff leader from our students, right? Asking them, who is a staff member who you feel really sees you, mm-hmm. who you feel really connected to, who you feel like helps you navigate school as a student of color at Thurston High School. And we asked those questions. We did interviews with each of our kids and asked that question and identified a list of a couple of staff who kept showing up as that navigator and that person who really helped our students, because we also don't have any staff who themselves identified as Black or African American. And so that was one of the challenges, right? Again, mm-hmm. it wasn't just an immediate, obvious, this is how you're gonna do it.
Right.
And so starting with kids' voices, starting with the knowledge and vision that we needed to create space where kids could be whole. And so we listened to them, and so we solicited interest, right? We sort of came to those adults and said, hey, we checked in with kids and we heard your name over and over again. Would you be willing to open up a formal space to build connection with this group? Once a month, right, we'll fund the activity, the food, whatever the thing is, but want you to meet with that group of leaders and ask kind of what it is that they're imagining would help them feel seen and celebrated on our campus. And they said yes, right? Because these are people who get identified by kids because they love kids and they enjoy creating those spaces. This is an intentional, cultivated space though. Once we pulled those kids together, there were two things that they wanted. One thing that they wanted was just a space where they were able to be, and they were able to connect to those items of their own identity culture that maybe wasn't part of like Thurston campus culture in general. And so they wanted just like together space. And they could invite others, right? Or they could not, but it was, we're gonna watch a movie that is silly, that mm-hmm. right, and we're gonna eat popcorn and we're gonna tell stories. And so it was literally just building community space mm-hmm. with other kids who look like me, who navigate this school and experience and hear things that kids shouldn't have to experience and hear, but as part of the reality of being in an extreme minority mm-hmm. in a community where that diversity is not the norm. Mm-hmm. And so that was their first ask. And then their second ask was kind of a knowledge building space, like a desire to influence their peers mm-hmm. and help their peers understand how saying casual comments like that can be really hurtful. Mm-hmm. And actually beginning to influence like what is the range of tolerated and not on our campus at Thurston High School. Mm-hmm. And so those were the two things. And so the first one was really simple to honor, right? It's not an expensive thing to do. Mm-hmm. To hold community space for kids. Yeah. And so that was super easy. And that was the first kind of year of investment, was really helping strengthen the bonds of connection across our students of color on our campus. And then we started doing school-wide events that celebrated identity. That was sort of one of the things that we thought about, is how do we just increase visibility and tell the story that while the number of Black students on our campus might be really small, the total number of kids of color on our campus is quite large. The total number of kids who feel like there's some kind of subgroup or sub-minority on our campus, if you put us all together, we actually become a majority, right? You combine our students who identify as gender diverse, right? Who have, who are ethnically diverse, who are racially diverse. All of a sudden you start to tell a really different story about what diversity looks like at Thurston, but it can be hidden. And so one of the things that we did is we said, maybe let's not make it so hidden. Let's celebrate and elevate the diversity that is a part of Thurston High School and on our campus. So we have a block party, right, that is hosted by, right, because it's culturally connected, right? We had events for our Latinx students related to Day of the Dead. We had events that were sponsored for our girls' empowerment. They did a girls' night.
I love it.
And so again, each of our identity groups, right, that again felt like they were experiencing things where their identity was being othered and viewed as less than, they're representing a positive affinity of what it means to kind of live in that identity space. And so we have a whole calendar, like this year when we did our master calendar, this is kind of our third year in. They're on the master calendar for the year because we know that there's going to be a block party, right? We know that there's going to be a pride event for our kids. We know that Day of Silence goes on our calendar, and it's because our kids have held space and started to show up and support each other, because that was one of the other things that we talked about. We talked about how maybe we're small but mighty, but when we show up for each other, right, all of a sudden that's a really vibrant space. And so that's also one of the things that we did. And so they have a habit of showing up for each other.
I love that.
At events, and so they're all pretty busy. And then we started advisory lessons and the harder work of what it is to tackle head on what it means to be a person who is in a community where we welcome everyone, right? That sort of second piece that the group got excited about is around how to begin to shape our campus climate as a whole as one that's welcoming and inclusive. We started with really, again, sort of started this simple thing. It could be reduced to tokenism, but if you do it well, I think it's not. But you take advantage of those heritage months. You take advantage of those sort of national structures that spotlight things. And so we took advantage of Black History Month. And in our advisory activities, we have a couple of months that are always open, and those became learning opportunities for talking about Black culture. And so we used the 3-minute videos on Black history. They're these great little episodes and shorts, and then pose some questions, open-ended questions to students. And so those were low stakes ways to begin to ensure that it wasn't just kids who were choosing to join Affinity Space who were aware that this community was present and being elevated on our campus, but leveraging our instructional minutes to say every student on campus at Thurston High School is going to experience a lesson that centers the identity of our Black students.
I love that.
And so that's the start, right? And then it moved on. It moved on to asking the question of how do we actually train adults to be upstanders, because that was something that in listening to our students, they would sometimes talk about, is sometimes having experiences where there was an adult present and the adult didn't seem to know what to do. Kind of the adults waiting for the reaction of the student to see if it's serious enough to intervene in the moment or not. And so that uncertainty, that confusion that led to that pause is something that our kids wanted to talk about. And so we allocated staff time to have them be trained by our students. We have an incredible advisor who helped work with the students to actually organize the materials for that learning, but then facilitated that by our student leaders from each of our student affinity groups, kind of took a topic and put that in front of staff. And the question for this next year is how to begin to train kind of allies, right? Your friends who care about you, but who, just like a grown-up who doesn't know exactly what to say, we have friends like that too. And so we're going to open up opportunities to similarly train up your peers, the
I
kids
love
who
that.
already identify as your allies and who want to show up and care for you, and given these opportunities to say what they need to say, right, or to let that moment go. We want to teach them how to say what they need to say. And so that's kind of the work for this next year.
I'd love to hear a little more about the part with the advisory lessons that you all built.
Absolutely. And Carmen, to circle back to kind of the one thing I would say to a leader who isn't sure how to get started is our students live their identity every day in our school. Asking them explicitly about it is not going to be it's not going to cause shock or awe, or they're not going to say, no, I don't live in my skin. And so sometimes it's the confidence of knowing that that's an experience they're living through, and demonstrating your curiosity about it takes courage when you're a person in a white skin, right, who's heterosexual, who doesn't necessarily share those backgrounds, but the courage to ask them about their experience is really the opening question. Our student representatives led that work, so they both like designed the content, and they started from a place of like putting out what examples were that each of them were experiencing based on their specific identity, right? So what did they know from being tapped into their community? You know, this is what it sounds like at Thurston when I'm feeling marginalized, right? Like these are the kinds of comments that are being said, and inevitably, you know, everybody knows the big ones, right, that are super othering. They call them macroaggressions.
Right.
In some ways, those are the ones that are easier because we all know what they are. We all recognize them as hostile expressions, as hate speech. And so the impetus to intervene is much clearer. The duty to intervene is much clearer. The thing that they spend a lot of time defining is locally at Thurston High School, what does it look like when I'm othered in those micro ways, right? And so comments on my hair texture, right? Things like that. And again, helping to tell the story so that adults could know this is what you might hear, and hearing from students, and this is what I wish you would do, or wish you would say, or hoped you would check in with me, right? They told the focus of the training that our students gave to our adults was telling the story of what it looks like for them in their classrooms and in the hallways at Thurston, and then to invite them into the actions that they wish that they would take. And that is something that your students know, right? They are the ones who can tell us how they experience it at their campus, and they're the ones who can tell us what it is that they wish adults would do. And that might, the answer to that, I'm sure there will be similarities, but that might be a really locally defined thing.
Right.
Because our kids are the experts on how to navigate their identity in our spaces.
I love that. And I love that you're allowing students to also be in front of staff so that staff can learn too. And I think you're right. I think sometimes people freeze and they don't really know how to respond to something. And having students share their knowledge and having that training, being alongside teachers, I think is amazing. Thank you for that work. I know it's really difficult. What was the impact from this work like?
Yeah, I mean, the first big impact is how empowered our kids felt. For them to be elevated to share their experience has really shifted our students' beliefs about what it could look like for them to be leaders on our campus. A lot of them had the story that they couldn't be a part of formal leadership structures, or they wouldn't be able to lead centered from a place on their identity, like that they could lead, but if they left their identity kind of over here. And that is one of the biggest changes. So some of our leaders who participated in those affinity spaces and then in those trainings have now run for formal student body leadership.
I love it.
And so they're now in the position where they get to allocate resource and can fund their own block party, right? It doesn't require building principal funds to say, I support this, but they get to allocate that resource directly because they're the decision maker, right? That this is who we are and this is what we value. And so that's one of the big first changes, is just their sense of ownership, and them feeling that sense of ownership. That's belonging.
Right.
A belonging is rooted in the belief that you have ownership and a stake in this community.
About the work that you're doing with these students and how powerful that is, and the impact that you've been able to have on these students and empower them is just one piece of a story that we want to share about what's happening in education across our state and the amazing work that our leaders like you are doing. So as a high school principal, I know because I was a high school principal and I know how difficult that job can be. What brings you joy?
I've been at Thurston for 4 years, and so it was super moving to be at graduation this year because those are kids that I've gotten to see on their whole journey. And it is so fun to see, like, to remember those little murmurs of who they were when they first like walked our hallways as students, right? Many of them walked them before as like siblings or at an activity, but to really be a Thurston High School student and then to be graduating, it was really moving to be with them for that whole journey and to send them off, and you know, as they cross the stage, to know those stories, like the student who is off and just leadership unlocked, right? Out to just do amazing things, and to feel like, man, we played a small part in that. And it's a huge honor. And so their stories, right, and what the stories of their leadership and what the choices that they get to have and the work that they get to go on to do is just super inspiring. And so that brings me a huge amount of joy. And you experience that at the small levels, right, with recognizing those faces as you walk the hallways and find them in the, you know, maybe where they're not always supposed to be, whatever that might be, right? You find kids everywhere, right? Our campus is a vibrant place. But the work that those kids go on to do, right, they're building and leading communities, and they do that while they're with us, and they also get to do it after, and it's very cool to see.
I love it.